The U.S. government once maintained a secret surveillance file on Helen Keller. Intelligence agencies spent decades monitoring her correspondence and public appearances, concluding her words were a matter of national security. She spent her first 10 years in total silence, unable to see, hear, or speak. Yet she stood on global stages, advised 13 U.S. presidents, and befriended Mark Twain. The standard historical account of her life usually ends at her childhood. That inspirational narrative captures only a fraction of a much louder and more confrontational record. Her life began normally in 1880. For 19 months, she was an energetic, healthy child running through the fields in Alabama. Then a mystery illness, likely scarlet fever or meningitis, swept through her. She survived the fever, but it took her sight and her hearing. Because she could no longer hear the world around her, she lost the ability to learn how to speak. She was left in a total sensory void. She possessed a fully conscious mind, capable of complex emotions and desires, but she lacked any mechanism to project her humanity to the people around her. By age 6, she was known in her town as the Wild Keller Girl. She would frequently smash dishes in a desperate attempt to exert control over a world she couldn't perceive. She became violent, once locking her own mother in a pantry. In the 1880s, there was no standard path for children like Helen. Doctors at the time frequently recommended that the deafblind be sent to asylums for the rest of their lives. Seeking an alternative, her parents reached out to the most famous communication expert of the era, Alexander Graham Bell. Bell, who spent much of his life working in deaf education, connected the family to a school in Boston. They sent a 20-year-old teacher who was nearly blind herself. Anne Sullivan arrived and immediately made a radical decision to separate Helen from her parents. She moved Helen into a small, isolated cottage on the property to gain total control over how the girl experienced the world. This collision between a trapped mind and a teacher who refused to yield created the exact friction needed for Helen to finally find a bridge to the outside world. For weeks, Anne pressed specific patterns of letters into Helen's palm. To Helen, these were just physical movements. She had no concept that the shapes in her hand were actually names for the things she touched. On April 5, 1887, her teacher Anne led Helen to a water pump. As the cold liquid rushed over one of Helen's hands, Anne spelled the word water into the other. The connection finally formed. Helen realized that the specific pattern of fingers in her palm was the name for the cold sensation running over her skin. She immediately demanded the names for everything else she could touch. In a single afternoon, she learned more than 30 words. In less than 12 hours, she transitioned from absolute communicative silence to a state of desperate, constant inquiry. This event remains one of the fastest recorded instances of language acquisition in history, proving that her mind had been fully formed and waiting behind the silence all along. She mastered Braille in 3 languages, but then she attempted the impossible. She decided to learn to speak. Because she couldn't hear, she had to place her fingers on her teacher's throat and lips to feel the physical vibrations of speech. Teaching her vocal cords to form sounds she had never heard required a level of repetition that few could endure. It took 25 years of daily practice before her speech was clear enough for a stranger to understand. During that time, she also conquered the academic world. In 1904, she graduated with honors from Radcliffe College, becoming the first deaf-blind person to earn a degree. This success was not a straight line. At age 11, she was accused of plagiarism and forced to defend her integrity before a panel of judges, a trial that haunted her and made her question her own mind for years. Her historical legacy isn't just about overcoming physical limits. It is about her refusal to be silenced by a world that repeatedly tried to doubt her capacity and her character. As she grew older, she moved far beyond the role of a gentle icon. She became a fierce political fighter who used her fame to advocate for causes that made the powerful uncomfortable. She was an outspoken socialist and a frequent presence on picket lines, publicly supporting labor unions and radical strikes when doing so was considered dangerous. In 1920, she helped found the American Civil Liberties Union, an organization that continues to shape the American legal landscape a century later. She maintained this influence across generations, corresponding with every president from Grover Cleveland to Lyndon B. Johnson. To maintain her financial independence, she spent years performing on the vaudeville circuit, demonstrating her ability to answer complex audience questions live on stage. Her influence even extended to the animal world. After a trip to Japan, she introduced the first Akita dog ever brought to the United States. The real Helen Keller was an unapologetically bold force who lived a massive, loud life entirely on her own terms. She spent 87 years without ever seeing a sunrise or hearing her own name spoken. Yet, by the end of her life, world leaders were coordinating their schedules around her travel dates. If you look at your own life, what is the one difficult decision or uncomfortable action you are currently avoiding? Helen Keller didn't wait for her senses to return or for the world to make her path easy. She forced the world to believe in her through relentless daily motion. If a woman with no sight and no hearing could change the institutional fabric of her country, what exactly is your excuse? Limitation is not the end of a story. For Helen Keller, it was the exact crucible required to build a character that the world could never ignore.